Welcome once again, everyone, for the very last presentation on this series of lectures. This one is on death, the fragmentation of time, the past, the present, and the future. There is a very interesting relationship between ceramic and sexuality, as we have seen in the previous presentation. And there is also a very important relationship between sexuality and death, what is called in mythology Eros and Thanatos. And there is an example of that here in this wonderful bowl by Ken Price from Appice Curios from 1974. And many artists have explored this relationship between sexuality and death in very interesting ways in the recent past because of the social context in which we live, where the relationship between sexuality and death is often at the forefront of society and human relations. This is the wonderful Scarab Vase by Adélaïde Alsop Robineau. She was a very important artist working at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century in the United States. She was a great master of porcelain, and she made the Scarab Vase for her own ashes, and it was donated to a museum in Syracuse, New York, where it still is today. It is her absolute masterpiece, and it does contain the ashes of her cremated body. So this creates a very intimate relationship between an object made by the person for which it is meant to be the container of her remains. And again, the work of Richard Millet, who has explored that relationship in the connections between certain ceramic forms, like the Likitoi, who was a funerary object in Greek antiquities, and he has reintroduced that object into the context of his very intellectual and conceptual work investigating various aspects of ceramics, asking quite deep questions about the nature of the art form itself. This is an example of my own work. It is a funerary urn. It is a bronze mounted stoneware jar that opens up. The lid functions operationally, and you can put ashes in it. It is not necessarily a functional object, because this one was made specifically for French philosopher Michel Foucault when he died of AIDS, and I made a series of those funerary urns for various AIDS victims in the late 80s, early 90s. People make funerary urns for all kinds of loved ones. This is an example here for Sheldon. And this ceramic artist potter made two cups, a small cup joined to a larger cup, glazed with the remains of his father. He collected the ashes of the cremated body of his father and uses those ashes to create the glaze, celebrating the relationship he had with his father. Now I have a large section on shards, cracks, and broken fragments. We have looked at this aspect of ceramic before in the material aesthetic presentation. This is a scene from the movie Cloud Atlas. Very often in a movie, if there is a ceramic object on the table or in the background, at some point it will get broken. And the wonderful photograph of Martin Klimas, which I have analyzed somewhat in the figurine part of the figure and figuration in ceramic presentation. So it is quite interesting to consider what happens when a ceramic object breaks. Sometimes it is the death of that object, and sometimes it is a rebirth for it, as we see in the work of Alexander Hulme. But the idea of repairing a broken object and fixing it and making it into something possibly even better than the original has its origin to a large degree in kintsugi repairs for tea ceremony ware in 17th century Japan. And that's an interesting aspect of historical ceramics, where the repair of an object is meant to improve on its aesthetic quality and the experience it provides. And quite a few contemporary artists are repairing broken ceramic objects. in very interesting ways with new material, and sometimes of great, craftsmanship and sophistication. And, why do such a thing? Why take an object that has become valueless and dismissive and basically garbage to be thrown away, and spend an inordinate amount of craftsmanship and time and using precious material like wood to repair it? What is the meaning of that gesture and the connotation and metaphor it engages with at the level of human experiences? You even find faux broken and repaired tea set here with this staple technique made by a porcelain company in Italy, Richard Ginori. This is not broken at all. It just looks like it's been broken and repaired, and it's dinnerware you can actually purchase and use perfectly normally otherwise. And there are quite a few examples of that happening in the world right now. There seems to be some sort of fixation on fake, broken, and cracked dishes that are seemingly repaired in some way or other. And again, in the work of many artists here with wallpaper over broken pots, many artists are breaking things like Keiko Fukasawa, passing the charge to inmates in prison with which she works, and each one of the inmates paints the fragment according to their own internal mythologies and interests and fixations and so on. And then the object is recomposed by reassembling all the broken shards to give again wholeness to the form. And the wonderful work of Hee Soo-kyung of Korea, where I believe it's a she, but I'm not quite sure. I would have to research that further. But makes wonderful work with all kinds of found objects that are broken and reassembled, again in the kintsugi style of repair with gold over lacquer. And it sort of goes on and on, as is the tendency with most of my presentation. There are so many artists working with this idea of breakage and repair in quite exciting ways. And the wonderful dresses and costumes made in the recent past by Li Xiaofeng from China are symptomatic of that approach to repair that is, I think, quite symptomatic of the current state of psychological experience in contemporary society. And a fashion designer like Martin Margiela making this necklace with broken dishes. And you can buy this broken Ming vase as a puzzle. So you take it apart and then you can reconstruct it. It's just printed on paper, but it embodies ceramic forms, ceramic surfaces, and a ceramic context in a very interesting context of the puzzle. And we have seen this approach as well to fragmentation and, showing only bits and pieces of objects that are as if constructed with fragments of other things. And Sin Ying Ho is one of those makers. In Australia, Stephen Bowers with drawings on plates. Those are just simple flat plates with very intricate and elaborate drawings made with, amazing deftness and technique, showing broken shards of ceramic floating in the space of his vessels. And Liu Jianhua, again of China, with his broken porcelain objects. In the process of making his work, molds are made from found objects, multiples are cast, many of them will warp or crack or break in the process of making. So instead of throwing them away, he reuses them in piles of broken shards that again exemplifies the state of anxiety and the psychological confusion in which contemporary society lives. And another example here of another installation in another context of his broken porcelain objects. Dana Claxton working with bone china buffalo. Buffalo were slaughtered in huge quantities to create bones to be ground into bone ash for the making of bone china in 19th century England. And the indigenous artist makes a relationship between the animal and the object in that wonderful installation of great power. Jim Melchert, another pioneer of the development of contemporary ceramics in the 1960s, taking a ceramic tile, breaking it, and then creating wonderful pattern following the breakage of the tile that is then reassembled as a complete composition. And then Marek Cechula with his mandala made with broken ceramic, reorganized in wonderful patterns, and again making you aware of the nature of ceramics, the origin of those materials, their connections to all kinds of aspects of daily life and domesticity and decoration, and quite complex relationship between those things. And again, Marek Cechula with his cancer teapot full of warts and bloated aspects, and his wood-fired stacks of dishes that are deformed and fused together and create sculptural units of great psychological intent. And this is a plate that he found, and whether he broke it or found it broken, I'm not quite sure. But again, it enhances, the breakage enhances the relationship we have not only to the object itself, but also the image which it holds and contains. Many artists are making work that is meant to be broken because of the fragility of the clay, and in the process of breaking it, the release happened, but also a new experience of the relationship we have to the form. And Studio Khan makes jewelry that you have to break to transform into something else, like a heart or a message contained inside. And in that process of breakage and reassembly, a new meaning is created, and we have another example of that here in the work of those collaborators. And the work of Boek de Vries as well. Boek de Vries was trained as a repairer of porcelain. He has all the skills necessary to repair a broken object and make it whole and perfect again. But he has used this understanding of breakage and broken things to make sculptural work of great originality and great power, making references to war, to nuclear explosions, to all kinds of aspects of contemporary society that are perfectly suited to be expressed within the context of broken ceramics for very obvious reason. And quite recently, he has made those objects where he breaks a teapot, has another one constructed out of blown glass, in which he then puts the shards of the original broken objects referenced in the clear blown glass objects that he has created. So there is at the same time of the breakage, there is a repair in another material, which is also a ceramic material, and it creates a relationship of great intimacy. And Chep Design, with their Do Break vase, the vase is lined inside with rubber, so that when you break it, it doesn't fall apart. The shards stay glued to the rubber and maintain the integrity of the object to a degree. And one could say here, as with Kintsugi repair, that the broken object has been improved by gaining in intensity and in power through the destructive and violent nature of the gesture that has modified its form. People breaking things and repairing it again, and people making things that look broken but are actually not broken at all. They're completely integral objects that could be, part of any kind of functional context. And Yoko Ono, again, with those objects I have shown you before, which look like they have been repaired with the Kintsugi aesthetic. And creating performance pieces and interactive pieces where a lot of broken shards are meant to be reassembled with twigs and tape and bad glue by people assisting her in this collaborative process of repair in a way that is impossible to achieve any kind of significant result. but engages you not only with material and processes and attempts, failed attempt at success that create wonderful psychological conditions for new meaning to arise. Through design for Rosenthal, again, breaking a vase, putting it back together, creating a mold of the repaired, quite badly repaired object, and then creating integral cast from that mold so that the object gains again the integrity necessary for use and function to operate within the object. And I've shown you the work of Lu Bin from China again, which has used the same principle to make those wonderful groupings of 5 objects called the garniture. And people drawing lines on an object so that it appears as if it had been broken and repaired, or there's just a lot of that kind of work where you don't exactly know what you're looking at and what the work is about, but in assessing its nature and its meaning, what happens when an object appears as if made with 2 objects coming together and creating a whole again, and those are actual objects made that way so that they are completely, perfectly fine and sound objects that just appear to be made with 2 broken units. So this idea of breakage engages with the idea of entropy in physics, where it's not possible for 2 breakage to happen exactly the same in 2 different objects. And this artist is contesting these things by making duplicates of broken objects that look like they are identical and would have broken in exactly the same way, which is an impossibility in the world of physics. And I quite like those plates here by Kate O'Connell, where she has made what would be small fragments of plate into large fragments of plates that can then be used in a functional or a decorative context. So she has changed the scale of the fragment to make it again into an object that could be functional in another context. Or Richard Wentworth using found objects that have been broken and making you aware of the break by lining them all up into a continuous presentation. Even in the world of design, there is this approach to fragmentation, to breakage, to reassembly, to what would happen if the world was destroyed in some calamity and all the objects we are familiar with were transformed by those dynamic and violent processes. And the wonderful work of Hilda Hellstrom made with Fukushima radioactive clay to make you aware of the danger present in nature now with nuclear technology. Again, Yoko Ono, who broke this vase as a memorial to video artist Namjoon Paik at the Whitney Museum in New York, and then she gave a piece of the broken vase to all the people assisting at the event, and they are to come back to the museum in a certain number of years, bring back their shards, and then hopefully the vase will be recomposed as a whole again after having been dispersed over a large area of geography by all those people assisting at the task. Chris Martin did something similar where he broke a large ceramic vase and then repaired it and made it more or less whole again. Many artists use in their video or art installation ceramics in this way now, making objects that are meant to be broken at some point in the performance to engage with psychological states in interesting ways. And of course, the very famous broken Tang vase of Ai Weiwei, where he took an actual antiquity and dropped it. And when Ai Weiwei had a show of his work in Miami, a Miami artist, Maximo Caminero, went to see the exhibition, and he took one of Ai Weiwei's vase and broke it, with the idea that if Ai Weiwei can break a vase, so can he. And he was also making a social, political statement about the fact that local artists from minority groupings are not represented in museum as much as they should be. Of course, he got into big trouble for doing such a thing. And then I have made this vase myself called Ai Weiwei Catching the Vase, where by reversing the image cut in the shape of the original Tang vase he used, it appears as if the vase, instead of dropping to the ground, is dropping back into the hand of the artist and is instantly made whole and repaired again. And inside that cylinder vase that I made, it says ceramic is the memory of humankind, to make you aware of its archival nature and its specific role within society, culture, and civilization. Ai Weiwei, again, speaking of death and health and dangers and so on, made a scan of his artist's skull after a concussion he got from police brutality. So again, as I've mentioned before, the context of a plate is an interesting space in which those kind of images to operate, because they embody connotation with all kinds of human relationships and human behaviors that enhances the nature of the image itself. And Ai Weiwei taking ancient pots, grinding them back into powder, and exhibiting them as dust to make you aware of this. The source of ceramics is clay, and then it can go back to clay, but it also creates a relationship between human being according to biblical texts, which are meant to be dust and return to dust after death. And Wolfgang Leib, a very important contemporary artist, in his Frieze of Life, made 400 pots with ash from human cremations, again to make you aware of this very intimate relationship between life and death that exists within a ceramic context. Wolfgang Leib is known for his work with pollen, with an organic natural material that he collects in large quantity. So he has been working with dust and dust material and ash material for quite a while in a variety of contexts. This is the quite extraordinary work of Darren Waterston, who has reconstructed the Peacock Room by James McNeill Whistler, the famous 19th century painter. And he has reconstructed the room as if an earthquake had happened or something very dramatic had taken place in the room, and all the pots on the wall fell down on the floor and broke and so on. And it's quite an interesting reworking of a very beautiful historical installation in a room to make you aware of the passage of time and the nature of, the fragility of existence in many ways. In many festivals all over the world, pots are broken for a variety of reasons. Here, a pyramid of people is made so that a young child can make it to the top and break a pot that then releases a very strategic liquid. And in Denmark at New Year's, people just throw out the old pots that they have out the window into the street, and piles of broken shards are made this way with all the discarded objects that people break in order to renew the year and start it afresh. Jimmy Kilpatrick from Calgary, with his ceramic cymbals performance, he cast a large number of cymbals out of bisqueware, and then playing drums, he broke them all. So ceramics is an interesting material for its fragility, the way it breaks, the way it can be reused in a variety of contexts and reassembled in other forms. And it's interesting to consider that aspect of ceramics, its breakability, as a form of death for the art form that also creates resurrections in all kinds of ways. And now I have a large number of images of death, through which I will go reasonably fast, because some of this work has been shown before. But again, there has been more or less of an obsession recently, and even in historical time, as we see from those skulls from 1756, with images of death and skulls and bones in contemporary ceramics, sometimes in a very beautiful and ornamental way, sometimes making references again to blue and white, to the blue willow patterns, to ceramic contexts, and the use of glazes, the use of patterns, um, the introducing function, or all kinds of references to culture, to various contexts, introducing plates in the context of bones and skulls, or birds and knickknacks and giftware, and it's just an interesting way of using ceramics again, its relations to bodies, its relation to human behavior, its relation to all kinds of social issues around sickness, around war, around popular culture. And so many artists are using this references to skull to speak not only of death itself, but of human nature and what it feels like to be human, and what are the conditions of humanity, and how death is pervasive in society. I have explored this possibility myself in those Abu Ghraib vases with images of prisoners in the Iraqi prison on a vase made with the flayed head, more or less a skull, upside down as a vase, with various decorative surfaces and references to pottery form. And this connection of skulls and bones and death to ceramic goes on and on and on. I'm just showing you a few examples of that I have collected in the recent past. It's quite interesting to consider that all kinds of artists all over the world, it's a worldwide phenomenon, have more or less this obsession and fascination with those forms, those references, those metaphors, and the fact that those kinds of things are happening within the context of ceramics is not arbitrary. I believe that there is a very interesting and intimate relationship between those images, death itself, and ceramics, because we have to keep in mind that ceramics itself is often used in funerary rites. Historical ceramics are often found as funerary offerings in tombs and were preserved for that reason. And Keizuke Mizuno, often within his fruits and organic references in his work, at the center there will be a little skull or a little fetus speaking of death and birth. The wonderful work of Richard Notkins, making us aware of our relationship to all kinds of current issues in contemporary society, and death being at the center of this, and what happens when bones and skulls become decorated and beautiful and aestheticized and presented within institutional contexts in all kinds of interesting ways with interesting patterns, the conflation and contradictions implied by the coming together of those things in ways that are unsuspected, where bones become beautiful decorative patterns and interesting elements. And the use of ceramics permits the possibility for multiples and so on. And even in the field of design, as I mentioned regularly, this coming together of ceramic and death finds all kinds of wonderful relations, and at the level of form, at the level of surface, at the level of references to the classical aesthetics, the use of decoration and patterns, and many artists in the very recent past have explored the potential for those things to speak of our relationship to nature, the connections between nature and us as human beings, and what happens when that relationship is described and illustrated within the context of ceramics, where our relationship to dishes and food within the context of those very profoundly deep and somewhat disturbing connections between all those aspects are placed together, connected together, sometimes in miniature work, sometimes in works of great scale. Using the skull as a floor in an installation to cover a large surface with millions of those forms. And now I have a sections on memories and memorials, which are quite an important aspect of contemporary society as well, with the event at 9/11 in New York, which has memorialized. Of course, there are AIDS memorial all over the world. This is just an example of one. Most of them tend to be on ceramic tiles or incorporating ceramics in various ways, because ceramics is very permanent. It's something that you transform, it resists time, it embodies all kinds of qualities of humanity in ways that few other material and few other art forms can communicate with such efficiency. And I've shown you those images of the World War I memorial, where one ceramic puppy was made for each one of the dead of the First World War. And again, this one is a memorial for 600,000 dead soldiers, so that there are 600,000 ceramic objects within that installation memorial in Belgium. Aaron Toole, who is himself a war veteran, makes wonderful ceramics celebrating the death of many of his comrades and all the people who died in various conflicts. In cemeteries as well, we find a lot of memorial plaques on tombstone with images of the deceased, or memorials are made on plates and vessels for that purpose as well. The quite extraordinary work in ceramics of Mathieu Lehanneur from France, which shows the death rate by age and by country. So in each and every one of these countries, so many people are born at a certain time, and so many people died. Everybody dies at the end. It always ends with 0 at the top as a pointed form. But you can see that in each country, the shape of the death rate from birth to death according to age varies quite greatly and creates work of great beauty that sort of emphasize and archives that phenomenon in a material that will be passed on through history. And I'm ending this presentation on ceramics and death with those extraordinary dissecting tables from concentration camps, again, where in the context of hygiene and death, ceramics plays a very particular role. The same is true of the crematorium that were used to burn all the victims of the genocide in concentration camps. And then those wonderful clay discs that were also produced for the cremation of bodies in concentration camps, so that once the body was turned into ashes, there would be the remain through this little clay disc of a number telling us who that person was and keeping track of the production of cremated bodies in those concentration camps. This is a very interesting relationship between genocide and death and ceramics, because of its particular properties to combine and come together in a very disturbing way. And this is the very last image I will show you today. And in all of those presentations we have been working on together for the last few weeks. This is the wonderful little jar from the Ziwiye culture of Iraq. It's about 4,000 years old. It's the origin of glazes in ceramics. It's a funerary object meant to be put in a tomb as an offering. And it shows an image of a man dying, being pierced by an arrow or some device of some sort. So it embodies ceramics and beauty and the passage of time and the permanency of the archival nature of the material in its relation to the impermanence of life on earth, and how we are all going to die, and how ceramics can maintain a continuity through time in ways that are very specific and quite exciting. Thank you for attention, and I look forward to continue this discussion with you in the future. Thanks again.